On this week's 51%, we recognize women in art, both those who make it and those who inspire it. We stop by an exhibit on women's sewing samplers and learn how girls as far back as the 18th century used the age-old teaching tool to tell their stories and make their mark. We also hear from harpist Mikaela Davis about how she learned to jam alongside members of the Grateful Dead and sit down with a woman who once modeled for the famous painter Norman Rockwell. I'm Jessie King. It's all up next on 51%.
I was standing around like one of those girls I had seen in a movie. The whole world was a movie back then. I had my sunglasses on, I wanted to be seen without seeing shy Lolita. I wasn't really in it, I didn't really get it.
You're listening to 51%, a WAMC production dedicated to women's issues and experiences. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Jessie King. Today it's all about women in art, those who make it, sometimes on the spot, and those who inspire it. We'll start with a new exhibit at Vassar College's Francis Lehman Loeb Art Center that's offering a fresh look at an age-old practice, sewing samplers.
We've had a number of consultants and local volunteers who've helped out with different sections of our research and the show. Yeah, tons of women and men too are very active in their sampler practices.
That's Caroline Culp, an adjunct associate professor of art history at Vassar. And if her voice sounds familiar, you may remember her from a different exhibit we toured at the Locust Grove Estate a few months back on the Hudson Valley artist Caroline Clowes. Culp has a number of projects under her belt, and for the past year, she and her student, Ida Rose Chabon, have been going through the Loeb's expansive sampler collection in their free time, some 300 pieces from the Americas and Europe. The resulting showcase, called Between the Lines, highlights 14 of them from 4 different countries. So what is a sewing sampler? The usually square swatches were often used by embroiderers and lace makers to present an example of their work and to record certain designs, stitches, and effects for future use. It's something people still do today, both for that reason but also as decoration. But long ago, it also had very different purposes. Chabon says by the 18th century, nearly every middle and upper-class girl in the Western world would make at least 2 samplers as part of her formal education, to show her future husband she was literate and capable of caring for their home.
A really basic sampler is going to be a cross-stitched alphabet, maybe some numbers, and maybe a maker signature, which would be like her name, her age, the date it was done, maybe what county she was from. And a more advanced sampler is going to have like a basket of flowers or some animals or some symbolism like a house or a schoolhouse with kind of a reflection maybe on your moral integrity or a Bible verse or a psalm.
A woman is displaying her ability and readiness to take care of all the textile items in her future household. So she's ready to do all different kinds of stitches and stitch patterns in order to take care of these fabric items that were actually very expensive. We don't think of our bed linens and cushions as particularly valuable today, but in the 18th century, they certainly were.
Culp says the pieces in Between the Lines were chosen because of their similarities to one another. Indeed, girls were often taught how to map out and make specific, intricate patterns and designs. Culp says that's one reason samplers haven't gotten the widespread attention enjoyed by other mediums. In addition to being dismissed as women's work, they're often thought of as formulaic, as schoolwork. But when you line them up next to each other, you start to see the little differences between each one. Culp says those slight changes in pattern and color give flashes of each girl's distinct personality, values, and voice. Take, for example, 2 samplers by Eliza Fisher and Tacey Horner, made 7 years apart in the mid-1800s. At first glance, both feature a brick home at the bottom, flanked by willow trees on each side. A flowery border runs along their edges, with a quote in the center that today we might think is a little morbid, basically saying that long after they're in their graves, their friends will still have this sampler to remember them by. But Culp notes the similarities really stop there.
This one on the left by a young girl named Tacey Horner. She has stitched a little white dog scampering across the green lawn. There's a sky blue swan on the left side. All the way around are these embroidered pink roses and a yellow and purple and black butterfly, whereas Eliza Fisher has embroidered yellow foxgloves and carnations maybe in her botanical border. And all these differences really, I think, are expressions of each girl's individuality. We like to read out the inscriptions that each have included to show you that each is talking about morality. They're kind of a memento mori, a reminder of death. But each girl has selected exactly which line and exactly which quotation to include. Even down to the quotation, I think these girls are really saying something about who they are and how they move through the world.
Culp says samplers often required extensive planning, hours of work, and mathematical precision. Girls would sometimes combine multiple colors of silk to create new shades, and hand-draw their own graphing paper when planning their designs. One piece in a corner of the exhibit particularly stands out. It's not necessarily a sampler, but it's a dramatic combination of embroidery and paint by a young woman named Frances Vacher, copying a painting by a French artist at the time, called in English, The Hope of Return. There's something incredibly personal about these samplers the longer you look at them. Eliza Fisher's sampler has what Chabon believes to be the initials of her family and friends, dotting the empty spaces of her canvas. In a lot of ways, it's not far from a diary, a scrapbook, or a collage. This is their lives, hand-sewn on cloth. And as Culp notes, sometimes it's one of the only records left of them.
So many times, a sampler is the only instance we have in the historical record of a woman's name being present. So on the census records, of course, it would have been her father or her husband who was listed, and she would have been listed in the census as a dependent. Mm-hmm. So in a sampler, we get all of this wonderful historical information that we don't have from any other sources.
I've been able to, if I have enough information on somebody, if we know what country they're from, I try to go into Ancestry.com and see what I can find about them. Like, I found gravestones and maybe like a thing in the census about her. And my favorite one was when I found a lot of information about one woman, and I sent a picture of her sampler to her great something nephew. And I said, "This is your relative." And he was so excited. He sent me back a sampler that his grandma had made when she was younger, because they had kept the tradition up in their family of sampler making. And I love that you can find information about women that maybe no one has ever looked into before, that we have a real tangible evidence of their life and the education that they got and the proof that they were a smart person who was creative and who was doing these things.
Between the Lines, Innovation and Expression in Women's Sewing Samplers is on view at Vassar's Francis Lehman Loeb Art Center in Poughkeepsie, New York through September 3rd. Pieces will be swapped out for other samplers in late June to keep them from being overly exposed to light. You can learn more at vassar.edu, and if you want to learn more about American samplers in general, Culp suggests you check out samplerarchive.org. So what do you think of when you hear the harp? Weddings, classical orchestras, fairies and fantasy maybe? That's for me at least. Well, our next guest has recently been taking a jam band approach to the instrument almost, with an overall catalog that weaves together folk rock, psychedelia, and pop. Singer-songwriter and harpist Mikaela Davis is in the middle of a long North American tour and just wrapped a 3-week residency here in Albany, New York. Shortly before her stay, she spoke with WAMC's Josh Landis.
Davis is releasing a new record on legendary Olympia, Washington indie label Kill Rock Stars on August 4th. Titled And Southern Star, it was recorded at Old Soul Studios in Catskill. Its lead-off single, Far From You, dropped this spring.
I think anyone can relate to that song. I mean, I connect to that song, and the lyrics are so simple, but, just like yearning for somebody in your life that maybe you've lost or you're far away from. And especially over the pandemic, it had a new meaning for me, just being far away from everything that I loved.
Here is Mikaela Davis performing Far From You, live in the WAMC News Berkshire Bureau.
Well, there isn't too much left to say, I know. 'cause it's getting to be many years ago. It's a simple fact that ain't too hard to see, but I never thought you'd be this far from me. And I know that things have seemed to work out alright. Oh, but if I was to meet you in the moonlight, there's a place back home I often used to go, where the setting sun kept me from sinking low. And I know sometimes you used to go there too, so I never thought I'd be this far from you. And I know that things have seemed to work out alright. Oh, but if I was to meet you in the moonlight,
I started playing the harp when I was 8 and focused on classical music. And in middle school, I started writing songs on the piano. And then in high school, I decided that I should start writing songs on harp instead, because that's more unusual than just another girl writing songs on piano. I've always been a better harpist anyway, so I thought I can play this instrument better, so I might as well go for that. And me and Alex, my drummer, have been close friends since grade school. We grew up around the corner from each other, so I would show him what I'm working on, and eventually he started playing drums with me. And then we added guitar, and then we added bass, and then we added pedal steel. So I never really decided that I wanted to have a band behind me. It just happened, and I'm glad it did.
Davis has become known for her abilities as an improviser, which spawned from her experiences playing with the surviving members of the Grateful Dead, starting in 2018.
A friend of mine who is friends with one of Bob Weir's managers sent him a video of my band playing a Neil Young cover because he knew that Bob was having different people sit in with him on his Wolf Brothers tour. And that was that. So his manager showed the band the video and said, "Oh, do you want this harpist to sit in with you?" And they said, "Sure." So I got an email, and I did not expect it at all. And that's actually what threw me into improvising. I had not improvised in front of a crowd, I think, ever, until I played with Bob Lesh, until I played with Bob Weir at the Landmark Theater in Syracuse.
In 2020, Davis appeared alongside Weir, bassist Don Was, and drummer Jay Lane in an NPR Music Tiny Desk concert that's been viewed almost 1 million times on YouTube. Davis has also appeared in Phil Lesh and Friends, a rotating cast of elite improvisers the former Dead bassist assembles for his appearances around the country.
When I did a show with Phil Lesh last summer, I was in the bus with Stanley Jordan, guitar player, on the way to the show, and we were talking about music of the Grateful Dead and talking about how to play it and what to expect and how to improvise. And something he told me is, well, you know, as Phil once said to me, playing music of the Grateful Dead is like Dixieland. Everyone's doing their own thing. And so just do your own thing. And that was kind of an aha moment for me. I'm like, okay, I don't have to think about it too hard, I suppose. Just like do what feels right. And I mean, that's what improvising is. You know, you're just playing whatever you want. So there's nothing wrong. And the first couple times I played with Bob Weir, something Don Was told me is because I had said to him, I am very new to improvising. I don't really know what I'm doing. And he said to me, well, you're always a half step away from the right note. So that was also a moment I will always remember.
In May, she'll pair her interpretations of the Dead songbook alongside original work. One of those originals is Promise.
Promise is a song that I wrote with Alex, my drummer. And I actually thought of the melody when I was at a Phil Lesh concert a long time ago. But I wrote it for a friend who was going through some relationship troubles at the time. We tried to make the lyrics kind of clever with the way a promise nobody wanted to keep keeps coming back at the end of every verse.
Turn out the lights. You can be the person I want you to be, hiding in plain sight, like a promise nobody wanted to keep. In the honest sun, honey, you're not what I imagined to see. No, I'm the sorry one, with a promise I never wanted to keep. I try to stay away, but who's the one to blame when I come knocking on your door? When you cut your hair, will you try to change for me? Honey, you're still there, like a promise I never wanted to keep. Looking back, you're the one who gave me a reason to leave. I guess that's that. Just a promise nobody wanted to keep. I try to stay away, but who's the one to blame when I come knocking on your door?
Davis, a Rochester native, recently relocated to the Hudson Valley. She says it's the kind of peaceful oasis she's been looking for after a decade of touring and another busy year ahead of her.
I just want to play music, and I just want to be able to live comfortably playing music and bringing that to other people in the world if we can make folks happy. And yeah, that's all I want. I love playing a live show and connecting with people on the other end. And it's just fun to go all over the world and see the different reactions, whether it's like stuffy and everyone's just standing there staring at you, or whether people are dancing. It's always different, and it's just really fun. I'm so thankful to be doing this.
That was singer-songwriter Mikaela Davis speaking with WAMC's Josh Landis. For tour dates and more, check out her website, mikaeladavis.com. Our last guest today is not the creator of her masterpiece, but the model. Cambridge, New York resident Pauline Grimes was just 5 years old in 1952 when her family got a call to pose for American artist and illustrator Norman Rockwell. The portrait Grimes posed for, now called We the People's, Norman Rockwell's United Nations, featured a racially diverse group of subjects, and while it was never turned into a formal painting, it went on to inspire another work of Rockwell's called The Golden Rule. Now retired and a grandmother to 13 grandchildren, Grimes still gives tours and talks at the occasional Rockwell exhibit. She recently spoke with our associate producer, Jody Cowan, about how she met the famous painter and how her portrait was almost lost to history.
My mother was a single mother. In the evening, we would sing Negro spirituals, church songs, and we would go around. She didn't drive. She would hire a cab on a little fixed income with 5 children, hire a taxi, and we would go all over and sing to people. One day we went down to Grandma Moses's house and we sang for her. And she had, I'll never forget that, she had her hair done up in a little bun on top and beautiful little lace blouse. And she loved it. She invited us to come back. She knew that Norman Rockwell was trying to find a Black family for his United Nations picture. He was involved with trying to get a painting of people from every nation, and he wanted the delegates from the United Nations in front of this painting. He didn't want to be classified as just an artist. He wanted to be called a citizen of the world, and he was looking for world peace. And he thought that painting of the United Nations with the delegates in front and all of the different people behind him, it would send a message. And so we were called to go to Arlington. He said that if we got a cab, he would pay for it, which he did. And we were all dressed up in our church clothes. My brothers had little shirts on and tie and little church pants, and he stripped them right down. And they had little towels around him and bare-chested. And we were going to be representing the little African children. And we weren't afraid. Norman was just wonderful. We made it through.
You said you were 5 years old at the time. Do you remember having an appreciation or an awareness of art, or specifically Norman Rockwell's artwork?
My mother did, yes. She was a poet. She loved art. She loved color, flowers. It was just her thing. It was her hobby. And she connected immediately with him once we first, knew him. I didn't really have much of an appreciation for art, except for when the Saturday Evening Post used to come. I don't know how we could afford it. The new one, every time it came out, she had it. It was a picture of a shelf of all these beautiful cakes. And then the baker was sitting in front with a little bowl of lettuce and carrots. Every time Norman painted, it told a story. And so the storyline was the baker's trying to be good and have a salad in front of a whole shelf full of these beautiful frosted cakes that he made. So that was my first impression of Norman Rockwell.
After modeling that day, did you have any expectations? Like, did you anticipate seeing yourself in the Saturday Evening Post?
My mother did. The United Nations, unfortunately, he never published it. And so my mom was looking for the picture. The United Nations, which we are in, was never published. But a few years later, he painted the Golden Rule. And so she says, there we are. He said we were going to be on a painting with different nationalities and everything. So we went on for years thinking we were in the golden rule. And then when my husband and I we went to Stockbridge and we were doing some digging, and they said, the little girl down at the front, I always thought was me. That little girl is from Stockbridge. And so that was disappointing. But then they did finally take the United Nations charcoal out of the archives. It was crumbling. They took it out, they sent it away to a factory where they process pictures. We did finally get to see this. It was on display. So that almost disintegrated. We almost didn't make it. I wish we could have him explain, why he didn't use the United Nations. Out of the 60 people in the United Nations charcoal print, 8 people were chosen. And so I call it the sister print. I call the United Nations the first one, and Golden Rule is the sister one. When I give gifts to my friends, I'll give both. Those 2 prints belong together.
What would you say for you has been the lasting impact of modeling for Norman Rockwell?
Well, I'm so proud. What a beautiful legacy that I have that I can pass down to my children. My granddaughter, Madeline Flint, is an artist, and she said she would work with me because I would like to learn art, to draw. I would like to do that. A lot of people do knitting and crocheting and all that stuff, and that doesn't interest me at all. But if I could sit down and begin to draw, it would just bring it full circle to, Grandma Moses, to modeling for Norman Rockwell, and now I am learning to draw. I would love that.
That was Pauline Adams Grimes, a model in the Norman Rockwell charcoal drawing We the Peoples, speaking with our associate producer, Jody Cowan. That's a wrap on this week's 51%. 51% is a national production of WAMC Northeast Public Radio in Albany, New York. It's produced and hosted by me, Jesse King, with help from our associate producer, Jody Cowan. Our executive producer is Dr. Alan Chartock, and our theme is Lolita by the Albany-based artist Girl Blue. Just a reminder that you can listen to 51% anytime at WAMCpodcast.org or wherever you get your podcasts. On social media, we're at WAMC Radio, and you can stay in the loop by signing up for our weekly newsletter, Airwaves, at WAMC.org. We hope you'll join us next week. Until then, I'm Jesse King, 51%.
I was every single girl, I was nobody else, I was so sure of myself. I was 15 and a half, he was a hollow laugh. And I lost my cool somewhere along the way. The nightmare down the hallway, I had to learn how to look away. I lost my cool, no electricity, hot rain on the concrete, sweet melting little girl dreams. They said, oh, I want a big life, not a house I could have been like. Where are you taking me? Where are you taking me? Said